have entitled my presentation as the social component of the SDG14, building the concept of marine justice. Before entering in my presentation, I would like to explain who we are. The Observatory for Marine and Coastal Governance is a civil society organization based in Colombia, but we also belong to several initiatives that work in the Latin American and the Caribbean region, especially in the greater Caribbean region. For instance, we belong to the Water Our Right, Agua Nuestro Derecho, which is also an organizer of this event. Areas of work are marine justice and climate action, sustainable artisanal marine fisheries, and ocean literacy. So what we do as an organization, our work is focused on capacity building of local, coastal, and insular communities through ocean literacy, supporting climate action and litigation. We also do research. That is why we endorse the research group Marine Justice and International Law, directed by Lina Malagón. We are about to publish the first edition of the academic group documents, and you can also consult our users to access to seminars and conversatories about the impacts of illegal fishing, developing projects, coastal restoration, coral restoration, and protection of marine turtles. We also do advocacy work through joint reports to the United Nations with other organizations. So having presented the organization, I will address two topics. First, what I call the social component of the SDG14, which is the recognition of the rights for artisanal fishing communities. And secondly, I would like to share some thoughts about why we are talking about marine justice and moving from environmental justice to marine justice. There is one SDG to which implementation we would like to contribute. The SDG called to conserve and sustainable use the ocean, seas, and marine resources, the SDG14. However, we are concerned about the common ground to interpret the SDG14. As you can see in the picture, the most common idea about this goal is that of a swimming fish, and the name by which it is usually summarized is the goal of the life below water. Both the image and the name neglect the social component of this SDG, since this goal is not only about life in the deep oceans, but also about life of the communities, particularly those who inhabit the coastal and insular territories. This is not only a matter of a picture for us, but also there is a common understanding to interpret this SDG to attach to the marine science. Even though the inclusion of marine science in decision-making is crucial at this moment, our concern is that to think that ocean use is a matter exclusively for marine scientists is a mistake, as it is also wrong to think only about the communities of marine species and to leave aside the human communities that live on the coastal territories, as well as to leave aside the disciplines that study these communities, for instance, sociology, anthropology, linguistics, and social work. And also this idea of focusing marine science might exclude the traditional knowledge of these communities. So having said that, let me address the social component of the SDG14. The SDG14 targets cover aspects like marine pollution, sustainable management and protection of marine and coastal ecosystems, regulation of fisheries exploitation, conservation of marine and coastal areas. Among these targets, there is one of particular interest for us because it has a social content. Is the target 14.7.1, which states to facilitate artisanal fishermen access to marine resources and fair markets. The target is really abstract in comparison with others that have more specific indicators in the SDG14 and other SDGs. And because we are talking about a non-binding instrument as the SDGs, so the language is very weak for this target. So despite that criticism, despite that critics, the target points out two very important implications. First, the recognition of artisanal features as subjects of rights in the international law. And specifically, the target mentions two rights: the access to a sustainable and equitable use of marine biodiversity and the access to fair markets. I will explain later why I add the word equitable, which is not in the original SDG. So when we talk about artisanal features as subjects of rights in the international law, we must keep in mind that features are one of the groups mentioned by the SDGs, along with women and children, but there are other groups that were not taken into account explicitly, such as indigenous peoples. We also mean that says artisanal features are subject of rights in the international law leads us to recognize that they contribute to the local and national economy, and there is an obligation to preserve the traditions that are linked to this kind of fishing, and also to guarantee the rights, including the right to enjoy the benefits of the scientific progress and his application known as the right to science. So the right to science is essential to meet or to ensure the access to the use of marine biodiversity is sustainable and equitable. Sustainable because the scientific evidence is crucial to develop practices that conciliate the fishing with the conservation of marine species and the management of marine and coastal ecosystems. But as I said before, it is also essential to build bridges between scientists and communities, and to take into account the traditional knowledge of those communities. We will listen later the presentation of Melina Soto of the Healthy Reef for Healthy People initiative, and also Alejandro Lopez from Centinelas del Agua, who will show that kind of relationships between scientific knowledge and how to approach the science to the communities. So finally, I would like to share some thoughts about the novel concept of marine justice. And I say novel because we are still building it and understanding how to use it to defend communities, how to make it real. We agree on the concept of environmental justice and climate justice, which consists basically of applying theories of justice to environmental and ecological issues. And that implies taking into account that negative environmental impacts are differentiated depending on economic and racial conditions. To this concept of environmental justice, we add the concept of marine justice that implies the need of considering different factors like poverty, geographical location, lack of adaptation and mitigation capacity, and discrimination. So all these factors increase the risks and adverse effects of natural disaster and climate change, including environmental displacement. This is not only applicable to situations within the countries, but also between countries. For instance, while the geographical location to the access to the sea is an advantage for some countries, for other countries is a factor of vulnerability. Let's think about the small island developing countries that are facing greater risk because of climate change. And within the states, there are communities that live in the coastal and insular areas who are more vulnerable, not only because of the effects of climate change and natural disasters, but also because they face gentrification process, discrimination, and poverty. So having shared those initial ideas of this novel concept of marine justice, I would like to close my presentation saying that based on the original and complex meaning of the sustainable development and environmental justice, we need to build this concept of marine justice to better address and solve the environmental conflicts in the coastal and insular areas and between countries. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation. I also invite you to follow us in our social networks and to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you.